You think you know the Flintstones, bright colors, simple jokes, and a happy Stone Age suburb. But behind that cheerful theme song sits a show built on odd deals, quiet edits, and choices that would never pass today. From money that came through strange hands, to laughs recorded from people long gone, to one scene so dark it was quietly removed. Bedrock is not as simple as it looks. Let's crack open the quarry and find what the network never wanted you to notice. 20 mob connections in production during the early years of the show. There were steady rumors that some of the funding did not come through normal studio paths. People inside the industry later said that certain outside groups helped provide money for the work, though the exact reasons were never fully clear. These groups were not part of the usual television world, and their role brought a sense of uncertainty to the staff. A few names appeared on payroll sheets, even though the artists connected to those names were rarely, if ever, seen in the studio. Workers noticed this, but chose not to speak, since it was clear that questions were not welcome. Distribution also had unusual guidance. A powerful union group handled many details of how the show reached stations across the country. They oversaw shipping, contracts, and even certain scheduling choices. Because of this, the studio had to work with them for nearly every new release. The arrangement was never fully explained, and the union's presence gave some employees the feeling that decisions were being made far above the usual chain of command. If you think this one is unbelievable, wait until you see the next one. 19. The Honeymooners lawsuit that almost destroyed everything when the animated series first reached the public. Many viewers noticed that its main characters looked and sounded much like the well-known couple from an older live-action show. The main man had a loud voice, quick temper, and bold ideas that often went wrong. His neighbor was mild, polite, and steady, just like the earlier show's side character. Even the stories followed a similar path, with small home problems turning into larger situations. Because of these likenesses, the creator of the older program began to think the new series had copied too closely. He met with advisors, who told him he could bring a challenge against the new show. They believed he had a strong case due to the clear character and story similarities. For a short time, it seemed possible that the animated series might end before it had a real chance to build an audience. People inside the animation studio grew worried. They had already spent months drawing scenes, recording voices, and preparing future episodes. A dispute at that moment could have shut everything down. 18 Winston Cigarettes owned the first season. During the first season, the show had a strong sponsor that shaped many scenes. This sponsor sold a well-known tobacco product, and their support gave them influence over what appeared on screen. Because of this, the two main characters were often shown taking breaks to use the sponsor's product while talking about the taste and the quality. These moments were not placed outside the story. They were part of the scenes, blended into the middle of normal action, as if they were everyday tasks. In the early opening, the two characters even stepped away from their chores to stand behind the house and enjoy the product together. At the time, this was seen as a normal style of promotion, but later viewers were surprised to see such material inside what became a family show. Years later, when reruns began, editors had to remove or cover many of these moments. Artists used careful frame-by-frame work to erase the product from the characters' hands and change the shots so they no longer showed it. This process took time because many scenes had to be adjusted. The early season became an example of how sponsor demands could shape animated storytelling, and how later edits had to reshape that history for new audiences. 17. The show was almost called the Flintstones before the series reached television. The creators planned to used this name through much of the early work, including planning, art drafts, voice sessions, and printed promotional sheets. At the time, the name seemed fitting for a family living in a Stone Age setting. However, only a short time before the show was set to air, the team learned that a comic strip already used a very similar name. Because of this, there was concern that the two projects would be confused or that the makers of the comic strip might raise objections. With little time left, the studio had to act quickly. The title was changed to the Flintstones just weeks before release. This sudden shift created a long list of problems. Some voice actors had already spoken the old name in several lines, so the team had to re-record parts of scenes. Music cues that used the earlier title had to be rewritten. Printed materials, such as posters, ads, and sample merchandise were already made. So many of these items were thrown out or redone. Although the change caused stress and extra work, it shaped the identity the show became known for. The final title had a stronger sound, a clearer link to the main family, and a name that stayed with audiences for decades. 16. Barney's voice died and nobody noticed during the early run of the show. The actor who voiced Barney faced a serious car accident that left him unable to work for some time. His voice was important to the series, and the studio had episodes that needed to be finished. To keep the show on schedule, another skilled voice actor stepped in. He studied the tone and rhythm of the original voice and tried to match it as closely as possible. Because the sound was already familiar to fans, the studio hoped that viewers would not notice the change. While this stand-in recorded new lines, the original actor began a slow recovery in the hospital. Even though he could not move easily or stand, he was determined to return to the role. The studio arranged special recording equipment so he could speak while lying in bed. A microphone was placed above him, and the team worked around his limited strength. He delivered short lines, laughs, and simple phrases at first, improving little by little. Most people watching the show at home never realized that two different voices were used during this time. The style and humor stayed the same, and the switch happened quietly. When the original actor finally returned fully, the transition was smooth. The event later became an example of how much effort went into keeping the show steady, even during unexpected challenges. 15. The laugh track came from dead people. The show used a laugh track to create the feeling of a live audience, but the recordings were not new. The sound team used a set of old laughter clips that had been made years earlier during the 1950s. These clips came from real audiences who had attended stage shows and radio programs. By the time the animated series aired, many of the people whose voices were recorded were no longer living. Still, their laughter continued to fill scenes, episode after episode. The sound machine that held these clips allowed engineers to play short bursts, long waves, or gentle chuckles whenever a moment needed extra energy. Because the tracks were used so often, the same laughs repeated across many episodes. Regular viewers sometimes felt they recognized the patterns even if they could not say why. The repeated sounds became part of the show's identity, giving comedy scenes a steady rhythm. Inside the studio, some workers called the device unusual because it carried voices from another time. But it was also practical. New recordings would have required a full audience and more studio time, which the budget could not support. The old clips were already neatly prepared, easy to control, and familiar to sound editors. 14. Pebbles ruined the original dynamic when the show first began. It focused on the daily lives of two adult couples. The stories were built around simple problems, work trouble, neighborhood plans, and light arguments. The tone was steady and aimed at older viewers who enjoyed humor about grown-up life. The writers understood this style well, and they shaped each episode around situations that adults could relate to. For a while, this approach worked, and the show found a strong place on television. Everything changed when a baby character was added. The new arrival shifted the center of the series. With a child in the house, the writers had to create new types of stories about bottles, naps, babysitting, and home issues connected to raising a child. These ideas pulled the show away from the original plan. Some viewers who enjoyed the earlier tone felt the new direction was less appealing. Ratings began to fall as the audience changed, and the creative staff felt pressure to keep the show lively even as the material grew harder to shape. The writers also struggled because they had not planned for long-term child-focused episodes. Many felt that the new character narrowed the show's range and limited the kind of humor they could use. They often said it made the series feel softer and less bold than before. While the new character did help with merchandise and public attention, it also created a divide between the early seasons and the later ones. The shift became one of the clearest turning points in the show's history. 13. The Great Gazoo was network sabotage late in the series. A new character appeared who did not fit the world the show had built over many seasons. This small green figure arrived from another place, spoke in a sharp tone, and often stood above the main characters, giving advice or warnings. His powers and style were very different from the grounded, everyday tone the show had used from the start. Because of this, many viewers felt the show had changed too quickly, and not for the better. Behind the scenes, the studio faced rising costs and growing pressure from the network. The series was expensive to make, and the network wanted a new direction that might lower the show's value and allow them to move away from their contract. The new character was brought in as part of that push. The writers were told to include him even though he did not fit the world they had shaped. They did what they could, but the result felt out of place. The sudden shift confused longtime fans. Ratings began to fall, and the heart of the show seemed to fade. Many people later looked back on this moment as the point when the series lost its balance. The character appeared in only a small set of episodes, yet his presence marked the beginning of the end for the original run. 12. Fred and Wilma were TV's first married couple shown in the same bed at the time the show aired. Most television programs followed strict rules about how married couples could be shown. Live-action series almost always placed husbands and wives in separate beds, even when the story clearly focused on family life. These rules were considered standard and were rarely challenged. Because of this, viewers were surprised when the animated series chose a different path. Fred and Wilma were shown sleeping in the same bed, something no other married couple on American television had done. The choice was bold for the period, yet it passed without major dispute at first. Some people believed that because the series took place in a distant age, the usual rules did not apply. Others felt that the animated style made the scene seem softer and less direct than a live-action version. Whatever the reason, the show became the first to break a long-standing limit. This moment opened the door for later programs. It showed that audiences could handle scenes that reflected real family life in a simple, natural way. While the choice may seem small now, it marked a significant shift in how television could present married characters. The scene remained a quiet but important milestone in the history of TV storytelling. 11. The animation was massively recycled. The series was created on a tight budget, which meant the artists had to find many ways to save time and money. One of the most common methods was reusing animation. Instead of drawing every action from scratch, the team repeated run cycles, walking loops, and even small gestures across many episodes. These movements were placed over new backgrounds to make them appear fresh, even though the drawings were the same. Background artwork was also reused. A single street or room might appear in dozens of episodes with only slight color changes. This made production faster, since creating detailed backgrounds was one of the most time-consuming jobs in animation. Mouth shapes were kept to a small set, so the characters could speak lines without needing new drawings for every sound. This limited the range of facial motion, but kept costs under control. Even props followed the same pattern. Items like tools, dishes, and Stone Age devices appeared again and again, no matter the story. The team used these shortcuts because weekly television animation was far more demanding than short theatrical cartoons.